Good morning. I have 9 o'clock, and we'll bring this meeting to order. We appreciate you being here. I think we got an important agenda for today. Appreciate everyone being here. We've got a couple of changes we need to make in the agenda that has been distributed. One is that the one that I'll be working off of the agenda that we distributed yesterday as opposed to the one that was mailed to you, and we've got one change that we need to make in that agenda. We want to move item 4D up to item 3J, which will move it from final reading to a first reading. So we've got those changes need to be made in the agenda. You've got the minutes also of January 27th meeting and March 2nd meeting. Is there a motion to approve the agenda and the minutes of those two meetings?
Second.
Okay, got a motion second. Any questions about those minutes or the agenda? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. I wanted to thank Carolyn for chairing that meeting on March the 2nd for me. Carolyn, appreciate it. We've got a very important item next. It's what we've called the report items, but in this case it's just some very important recognitions that we need to make. So James, you going to introduce that? Okay, appreciate it.
Good morning.
Morning.
Chairman Ralston, Commissioner Huffman, and Executive Director Dr. Nixon, and State Board members and other distinguished guests. This morning we're here to recognize some schools in Tennessee that have shown, regardless of students' background, that education can truly make a difference in their lives. These 10 awards, 9 school districts, but 10 awards come from suburban, rural, and urban environments. They have shown the ability to meet and exceed state's accountability criteria for the past 3 years. Schools were visited by the State Department of Education staff to verify their exemplary practices, and they will be sharing those practices in various events across the state, both regionally and statewide. And we will also be featuring them on our Department of Federal Programs website. And I want to say that this first group that we're going to recognize has also been recognized in Washington, D.C. as some of the nation's best schools. And Secretary Arne Duncan did those presentations. So I'm really honored that we have opportunity for Commissioner Huffman, who has graciously agreed to present these awards. And at this time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask for our 6 blue ribbon schools, if you'd line up across the from where I'm at, and then Commissioner, I'll call your name, and Commissioner Huffman will present your award, and you're going to get an award, a plaque, and you're also going to get a certificate from our governor, Governor Bill Haslam, and I appreciate his office working with us and getting those certificates out. So our 6 blue ribbon schools, if you'd line up right across, and I know that you'd like to know the order, but you don't know that yet because I did it last night. First up, and I'd like to ask everybody to hold their applause to the very end if you'd be so gracious. These are Tennessee's Blue Ribbon Schools for 2011-2012, and first is Hume-Fogg High School, Metro Nashville Schools in Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Paul Fleming is the principal. Dr. Jesse Register is the director. And accepting the award is Dr. Michelle Wilcox from Metro Nashville Schools. Paul, if y'all will, thank you, Commissioner. If y'all will come right over here, that would be great. Representing Williamson County Schools, Fred J. Page from Franklin, Tennessee, where Dr. Andrea Anthony is the principal and Dr. Mike Looney is the director of schools. Next, from Greene County Schools, South Greene High School, Greenville, Tennessee, Cindy Bowman, principal, and Dr. Vicki Kirk is the director of schools. I can't leave out Judy. There's Judy, the assistant director of schools. Representing Ray County Schools, Fraser Elementary School from Dayton, Tennessee, where Gail Kelly is the principal and Jerry Levengood is the director of schools. From Morristown, Tennessee, Morristown West High School, Hamlin County, where Dr. Jeff Morehouse is the principal and Dr. Dale Leach is the director of schools. Last but certainly not least, Johnson City Schools, Fairmont Elementary School in Johnson City, Tennessee, where Carol McGill is the principal and Dr. Richard Bales is the director of schools. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Tennessee's 6 Blue Ribbon schools, some of the best in the nation. Thank you so very much. You guys can have a seat for a second. If I could have the representatives from our distinguished Title I schools, we'd like to present you with a plaque from the Department of Education along with a certificate from our governor, Governor Bill Haslam. And these are our 2010 awards, and that if you guys will line up across from me, it would be awesome. First up is the State Title I Exceptional Student Achievement Award. It goes to John P. Freeman Optional School, Memphis City Schools, Memphis, Tennessee, where Monica Smith is principal and Dr. Cash is the director of schools. Next, the State Title I Distinguished School for Closing the Achievement Gap Award goes to the Michigan Avenue Elementary, Bradley County Schools in Cleveland, Tennessee, where Robert Brittingham is the principal and Johnny McDaniel is the director of schools. And I got to meet every one of them on my visit. I want y'all to know. They're awesome people. Next, the National Award for Exceptional Student Achievement goes to Fairmont Elementary School, Johnson City Schools, Johnson City, Tennessee, where Carol McGill is the principal. Dr. Richard Bales is the director of schools. And you will notice that they are the first time ever double winner in one single year. And last, but also not least, another awesome district, the National Award for Closing the Achievement Gap goes to David Crockett Elementary School, Lawrenceburg, Tennessee, where Anna Ray is principal and Dr. Bill Heath is the director of schools. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to present to you your schools in Tennessee that do not allow poverty to be an excuse for lack of success. They show that we can make a difference in the lives of our children by what we do in our schools every day, and that Title I can make a significant difference and be a contributor to student success. Ladies and gentlemen, our best Title I schools in the state of Tennessee. Thank you, guys. Chairman Ralston, let me say thank you so very much for always being so gracious and giving us the opportunity to present these awards. I think it's really important that we recognize them, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Great. Thank you. Good job. We certainly enjoy, this is one of our most enjoyable experiences, to recognize good schools. And it's one of our most important responsibilities. So we certainly want to offer our congratulations to all of the award winners. We think that is fantastic. And I hope that, one thing that you will do is to share the good things that you're doing with other schools. This board has heard me say many times, they're probably tired of hearing me say it, but I think one of the things that we do least well is to share good practice. And y'all obviously have some good practices in place, and we certainly encourage you to share it with other schools that are out there. So again, congratulations. Appreciate the way that the awards were made, the presentations were made. Good job, but I do appreciate the good performance. Okay, now we'll move to the items for first reading, and the first one is A and B and health science education. And if we can, maybe we can talk about A and B together at the same time, and we'll then entertain approval of both A and B at the same time. So, Heather, you're going to, okay?
Thank you. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm Heather Justice. I'm the Director of Talent Improvement and Career and Technical Education, and want to recognize Dr. Danielle Mesra, our Assistant Commissioner, as well as Lynn Cohen and Penny Ash, our Education and Licensure Consultants. So any questions that I may not be able to field, they will help. We had received several requests for both the health science and the criminal justice licensure requirements from several local systems to allow them to make changes to increase the pool of qualified candidates. And so that's basically the reason for these changes. And I did want to note on the last proposed rule page, the second page of the rules, the proposed rule requirements, that was actually the second reading was on October of 2011, so that's a typo that we addressed. Any questions?
Okay, questions for Heather? Okay, any questions? Heather, would you, on the health science thing, it seems like a pretty significant change going from 3 years experience full-time to 1 year part-time. Could you speak briefly to
Sure.
the magnitude of that change?
Yes. We actually we researched methodology in different states as well as licensure requirements and industry requirements for hiring, and a lot of the trends, and Penny can actually speak more to this, especially for nurses right now, is actually part-time hiring in the hospitals. And so this is actually to allow those qualified candidates to be able to teach in our schools. So we will carefully monitor that quality. We are confident in our process that we'll be able to do that.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, is there a motion we approve A and B on first reading? Got a motion? Is there a second? Got a second? Any discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate it. Next item is item C, the approved high school courses. Lynn, you going to, okay?
Good morning.
Morning.
What this item does is update board policy section 3.205, the listing of approved high school courses with those CTE courses that the board has already approved as a part of the curriculum development cycle for career and technical education. Are there any questions?
Okay, questions, Carolyn?
So these are not new courses. These
Correct.
are already approved courses, just updating the list.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, other questions? Is there a motion that we approve on first reading? Got a motion, second? A second. Okay, any question, discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Gary?
Under the health science education, I assume we've just transposed a number. Most of them are 13. There's one that's 31. Just with that noted, we'll.
It looks like we've transposed a number there.
Yeah, that must be what it is. It is supposed to be 13.
Yeah. Okay, good. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. We'll next move to item D, migrant education, student record exchange policies, procedures manual. Paula?
Good morning, all. I went years without seeing you, and now here I am, twice in 1 year, coming before you. But that's great news for the Migrant Education Program. What this manual does is govern the use of what's called M6, the Migrant Student Information Exchange Database. That database is a United States Department of Ed computer information system that all 50 states are linked to. And what it does is provide folks at the district level and the state level and our migrant recruiters the ability to hop onto a national database and gather information about migrant students. And the beauty of this is, if you have a student who comes without immunization records, for example, this is just one example, rather than have that student get new shots every place they go, that record of immunization is on this national database, and the district can get on there and verify that they've had their shots, and the student doesn't have to go and get immunized every time they move. But the same benefit is had for credit accruals, any sort of registration information that's needed. It's a fabulous, fabulous database, and I'm proud to say that Tennessee currently is 11th in the nation in the volume of inquiries into that data system. So we're currently using the system, but only at the state level. And this sets up some policies and procedures so that we can now spread that to the LEAs, with guidance counselors and so forth being able to get on and use the system.
Okay. Questions for Paula? Any questions? Paula, you know, I think the intent and the value of this is great. I guess the only thing I get concerned about, it looks like it's an awful lot of paperwork involved, or a lot of work of getting all this information into the system.
Well, yes and no. There's a great volume of information. There are 77 discrete pieces of data that the Department of Education through ESEA has said you have to have in this database. But we've already got a system in place for doing that. When our recruiters interview migrant families and students, they gather most of that information already. And so what we ask the districts to do is, when a student leaves the district, share with us information they have on information such as IEPs, credit accruals, what courses they were enrolled in when they withdrew. And there's a form in place called an individual student record form that the district fills out on a migrant student, and they submit it to us, the migrant program, and we put it in a local database, MIS 2000, and that automatically uploads every single night to the national database should somebody move. So it's a lot of work, it really is, but we've got processes in place, and they've been tested now for a couple of years, and it's all running very smoothly.
Okay. Any other questions? Motion to approve? Got a motion. Is there a second? Okay. Any further discussion or questions? Okay. All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it. We'll move to item E, Tennessee Learning Center Leadership Policy. Sarah, you going to present?
Good morning. I'm here instead of my colleague Martin Nash, who was hoping to be here, but he is on a site visit with one of our residency programs this morning, so he sends his regards. And the motion that we have in front of us is around the Learning Center Leadership Policy. And as you know, this was passed initially in November 2008, primarily to guide the redesign of the school leadership programs throughout Tennessee, and has as its foundation the TILS, the Tennessee Instructional Leadership Standards, which has been recognized as part of this policy across the nation as really one of the finest leadership standards in the nation. It's based on the ISLIC standards and provides the same foundation both for our preparation programs as for the way that we think about developing and now evaluating principles. So really trying not only to look at preparation, but to have an attempt at coherent alignment across our system of preparing and developing principles. The item in front of you really is just clarifying some language in this policy. As we got closer to planning the site visit implementations, which will be taking place over the course of this next year, to recommend to you approval or conditional approval of these programs, we realized that it wasn't really clear the role of the site team that will go and perform those evaluations, the department's role, and the state board's role, just in the language of the policy itself. So what we've attempted to do in the item that you have in front of you is just to clarify again that the site visit teams will go and perform their review. They will bring their recommendations to the department. The department will then take those recommendations to you as a board for motion on approval of these programs. So there's nothing substantive that has been changed in this item. It's really just a matter of clarifying the language. I've met with Gary about this, but I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, sir, when will the visits start to take place, or the reviews?
We're planning the visits right now, and those will take place over the course of the fall and winter of this year. So starting in about late August, early September.
And once you start, then is there a regular cycle to come back and visit those? Is it the same cycle we use for the teacher?
That's a great question. Yes. So this initial recommendation, these visits will take place out of sync with kind of the teacher prep visits. But moving forward, after this initial approval cycle, those will be done in conjunction with the teacher prep visits as well. So they will be done in tandem.
And Martin's operation will be doing those just.
Yes.
So it'll be just part of the regular teacher preparation.
That's right. That will fold under his office on educator preparation program approval. That's correct.
Other questions, Teresa?
It's not a question. It's just kind of a request, Mr. Chairman, around the whole issue of principal leadership. And I know that we've talked a lot about teacher prep and a lot about the new teacher evaluation. I would just hope that we could potentially schedule a time during our work session to really focus on school leadership.
Okay, good suggestion, and certainly something that's very important.
If I could add a sidebar to that as well, just as it's relevant to the recognition that we just made. Paul Fleming, who's the current principal at Hume-Fogg, will be joining us in mid-June as the Executive Director of Leader Effectiveness, which is a huge win, I think, for our state in terms of his experience and ability to help guide some of that work. So you can look forward to hearing from him as well in the future on some of these issues.
Okay, very good. Okay, other questions? Is there a motion that we approve first reading?
So moved.
Okay, we've got a motion, second. Any further discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Sarah, thank you. Appreciate it. Good job. Okay, the next item is item F, standards for professional learning. First reading, Barry. Okay.
Good morning. I'm Huntsville King, Commissioner Huffman's Chief of Staff at the Department of Education, and had the pleasure of attending the conference that was related to this in the fall that was held in Nashville, I think in November, so along with Barry. So I'm pleased to be here to present this item. The standards for professional learning are, I think, the third iteration of national standards around what strong professional development for educators look like. And the body that has proposed these standards in the past it used to be called the National Staff Development Council, and they're now renamed Learning Forward. And they have previously put out, as I said, 2 iterations of these standards that I think have been adopted by the state board. And so this is just updating, because they have now issued a third version of their standards, sort of updating what these look like. And an example of these standards are, for example, learning communities. So the idea that professional development, professional learning is really best done within communities of educators rather than in sort of, large group settings, things like that. So any questions you might have?
Any questions? Okay, Mike?
When are these applied? Is this applied to people who are in the teaching field?
Yes, I think the idea is that this is sort of guidance for schools and districts in the state as we plan for professional development.
When we're looking at colleges of education, are we looking at them as to how well they align their curriculum in preparing teachers with these skills?
I think that's an excellent question.
Yeah, I can ask him.
There's a long answer to that, but I think, I don't know where they are on the standards for professional learning. There's a broader question with schools of education in terms of how to ensure that they are aligned with the vision for where we're going. We've had lots of communication with schools of education over the course of the last year. The department has a role in program approval, along with the state board, of course, and so that's something that's an ongoing discussion. And I don't know where standards for professional learning would fall out, but I think evaluation, Common Core, all the other things that we're attempting to do are part of the same question.
One of the things that I've always had the RCA Victor dog look about, can't get my, is that and I understand that it takes 3 to 5 years for a teacher to really get skilled up to be where they, that's a general, but there's so much and catchphrases like best practices and things like that I'm wondering how much of that was not provided during their tuition paying days to prepare them to be skilled up teachers.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. I think part of the intent of the standards for professional learning is recognizing that, as people are within a profession, for 10 or 20 years, that things will necessarily change beyond their training, even if their training was particularly strong. And I think the intent behind these standards is to, as we think about the on-the-job professional development that is necessary in any field, sort of best practices for doing that within schools. So it's certainly not a panacea for all things within the teacher field, but just sort of more guidance for schools and districts.
I think we should have Hansel explain how we're going to redo schools of education in the state of Tennessee.
I'd go with the United States.
Okay, other questions? Okay, is there a motion that we approve on first reading? Got a motion second. Any further questions? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay, next is the license denial, suspension, revocation policy, and Danielle.
Good morning. You have before you, we're going to take these two items together. They're essentially the rule and policy change to add the option for a formal reprimand in instances where a teacher engages in conduct that may not rise to the level of suspension, but where the board is required to take some action. This was actually introduced last meeting, but because of just a firestorm of concerns, we took it off, and in the meantime, Gary and I went and spoke with the executive director of TEA, explained our intent and addressed their concerns, and that it appears to be no further issue. So I'll entertain any questions.
Okay, questions for Daniel? Would you give us just an example of the kind of action that would be appropriate for a formal reprimand?
Currently, if a teacher engages in a TCAP breach, that's our major example, whereby they just open the test and look at it. We had a teacher who did that, and we had no other option but to suspend the teacher's license. If we had a formal reprimand, the teacher would have still been able to continue in employment for something that small, but without this in the hopper, we have to go ahead and suspend. So that's one example. I could give you countless others, but I think that's the best example that we have for the reason why we would need to do this.
Okay, questions? Okay, is there a motion that we approve the two items on first reading, item H and no, I'm sorry, item G and H? Got a motion? Is there a second? Got a second? Got a second. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, David, high school transition policy.
Thank you, Chair and members. The amendments to the high school policy in this case, what we essentially do in one major section is remove vendor-specific language. Tennessee Code, as you know, requires that students take an exam in the 8th, 10th, and 11th grade, and along those assess their readiness for college and career. In the past, the code is non-specific on what brand of test, for lack of a better term, should be, but the high school policy was specific, and it was Explore, Plan, and ACT, because at the time that was the only vendor that can provide such an exam. Since that time, other companies have come forward, and districts would like to have the option of being able to use the College Board suite of assessments, which are Ready Step, PSAT, and SAT to gauge that. And we have concordance tables which show what a score on one would equate to as a score on the other. Those vendors have, in this particular case, College Board, have approached the commissioner. Commissioner has already granted the opportunity, and that's the way the law sets out, that it's approved by the commissioner. This really just reflects what's going on there. College Board has also provided us with benchmark scores relative to various parts in the code, various parts in our policy where we ask districts to recognize things like graduating with distinction, and you see in there that we've been able to add in the appropriate equivalent. We had that place marker for a long time that said or equivalent on the SAT, and now we have that equivalent on the SAT. So we've just gone through the policy and plugged those numbers in. I'll happily answer any questions you might have.
Okay, question, Mike?
So, like on our master plan, will we go ahead and make those boxes bigger and have one for Explore and one for its equivalent?
I think the answer to that is yes, when a district starts doing that. Right now, I mean, we don't have a district that, to my knowledge, that has as a district taken the SAT suite on, and I think once that happens, that would make a whole lot of sense. And then we would be able to merge those numbers together to give us some college career, across the state sort of number.
Okay, other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve on first reading? Got a motion? Second? Any questions, discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you, David. We'll next move to the item that we moved from final reading to first reading. That's the teacher licensure, practice score, scale changes, policy. And Vance or Sarah? Okay, you're going to have a tag team here. Okay.
Yes, thank you. We are going to tag team this. I told Dr. Nixon yesterday if it was okay with him, I'd like to give you just a little bit of overview and context as to where our thinking is around licensure writ large and program approval. And so this is a bit of a revisiting of Commissioner Huffman's comments about professional development and how that ties to teacher preparation. I think what we recognize as we look really carefully at our First at the Top plan, and more specifically our strategic plan at the department, and look at those visions, the vision and goals around having an effective teacher and an effective leader in every classroom, that really charges us to give a thoughtful look to how we prepare unlicensed teachers. And so I know there was some conversation yesterday at the workshop about a need to really look at our licensure standards and to take a thoughtful approach given both the implementation of Common Core, which is going to mean new skill sets that will be required by all of our teachers, both current teacher candidates and existing teachers throughout the state, as well as the new performance data that we have through evaluation, and making appropriate links both in the licensure realm and at program approval will require that we really take a deep dive into our current practices around program approval and licensure. And so, given the item that Vance will be presenting, we want to make sure that when we make those changes that we do it in an appropriate, thoughtful way, that we engage stakeholders, that we take the appropriate time to work through the considerations that will be needed around any changes, and hope to come to you next fall with some of those changes that will affect more largely our licensure policies and our program approval process. So didn't want to use this this item that just affects the tests that are up for revision this year without thinking about it more holistically across our licensure standards. So just wanted to let you know that we will be coming back to you both in July with kind of an update on our work, and then certainly next fall with any proposed changes at that point.
Okay.
And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague here.
Okay. Vance?
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, board members and others interested parties, for giving me this audience on this item. This is the third time in the last 3 years we've come to you with recommendations for cut scores on some of our revised praxis exams, where we've kind of followed this pattern of proposing cut scores that are somewhat lower than the recommendation of the multi-state panel that reviewed these tests. And this is not something that we do lightly. I mean, we do come towards this with a thoughtful and deliberate approach. And we're trying to take into account here a balance of all the groups that are going to be affected by this, all the various demographic groups that will be taking these tests. And I think to appreciate that fully, we have to kind of look back at what has happened over the years with licensure exams in Tennessee. I've been dealing with the Praxis series tests since about the year 2000. So I've got about a 12-year history now with these licensure exams, and we see kind of a pattern here developing that Tennessee test takers typically do not do real well on these Praxis exams, in spite of the fact that not just in these last 3 years, but over the years, I recall, and those of you who've been on the board for a long period of time may remember Karen Weeks, who was a staff member of the state board, and Karen handled a lot of these study sessions that we used to do within the state that determined what the passing rate or scores would be. And I recall Karen saying, when asked, where does Tennessee fall in the range of scores for the various states, and her response was, we're typically somewhere in the middle of the pack to maybe slightly below the middle of the pack. So we generally have got some relatively low pass scores in comparison to some other states. Now, I've also been involved in, since the get-go back in the year 2000, with Title II of the Higher Education Act, which uses Praxis pass rates to kind of rank the teacher preparation programs. And you recall, by having seen some of these reports, that all the higher ed institutions, not only in Tennessee, but almost throughout the entire country, have gotten to the point where they're publicizing that they have a 100% pass rate. And they do this by requiring the test before you go into student teaching, so when you become a program completer, you have to have passed the test. But when we look at the results from all test takers, which is provided to us annually, and we look and see how Tennessee is doing, those pass rates are not as glowing as they look like in Title II. And an example is the one that we keep talking about is the math content knowledge test. And on a scale from 100 to 200, the math content cut score is 136. Now that's a very low cut score, but for the 10-11 school year, our statewide pass rate for all test takers was 49%. Now, what does all this mean? Well, it appears that some of our test takers are not being adequately prepared for the test. And when we look at the sequence of events here, you start with licensure standards. And we set these licensure standards, and then the programs, the preparation programs, look at these licensure standards, and they develop a program that incorporates the approved licensure standards. Then we look for an assessment that is aligned with these standards so that we're assessing the things that are covered in the program. Now, I've also been involved just more recently with a negotiated rulemaking process in Washington, D.C., where the federal government has raised a concern that we're not being honest in looking at our higher ed preparation, I shouldn't say higher ed, but preparation programs across the board, and looking to see which ones are high quality and which ones are struggling, and we're not identifying the ones that are struggling at a rate that we should be nationwide. And I think there's some agreement across Tennessee that all of our 40 institutions that prepare teachers are not doing an absolute stellar job in preparing the teachers for licensure. And even within a certain program, there may be some that are doing really well in some endorsement areas and struggling in others. Like they may have an excellent record with their elementary teachers, but in preparing chemistry or math teachers, maybe not doing so well. So that brings us back to, we've got to do more research and see what the underlying reason is for the pass rates that we're showing in some of these areas. And we're bringing on more staff that's going to be able to help us with this. We've got a new hire that's going to focus very heavily into research data with pass rates and things of that nature. And we're going to have to look at some of these tests and see now which ones have an exceptionally high pass rate and which ones have, like math, have an exceptionally low pass rate. And of course, a broader concern is that our African American population of test takers is struggling pretty much across the board. And that's another area that we have to look at. What can we do to make sure that demographic group is better prepared to pass these tests? Now, there is a tool available through ETS called a data manager, and we're going to open access to that to the researchers that we're going to assign to this so that they can look and see by university, by preparation program, which ones are doing real well on a given test, which ones are not. We can look at the candidates by their level of education, those that are just at the bachelor's degree level. How are they doing on these tests? Those that have master's degrees, how are they doing on these tests? And so on. So there's a ripe field here for breaking all this down to get a better feel for where we are. And then, as Sarah indicated just moments ago, the big picture here is not just are we going to set pass rates a little lower than maybe we'd like them to be, but what are we going to do long term to assure that we're preparing teachers that can not only pass these tests but can go into those classrooms and turn out high levels of teacher effect data. And that's really the bottom line in this. In fact, as an aside to that Title II negotiated rulemaking, instead of looking at Praxis pass rates as an indicator of a high-quality preparation program, they're now turning their attention to teacher effect data, and we'll be reporting that not only in the state report card, but now in the federal report card as well.
Okay.
So I guess I've rambled long enough.
Yeah,
so yeah.
yeah.
Oh, thank you.
The column that you've labeled here, the multi-state task force score.
Right.
Tell us what that is.
They take representatives from the states that use that exam. So, 2 or 3 people from each state that use that exam, they all assemble in Princeton at the ETS campus, and then they review the test and they determine what they think would be a reasonable pass rate for that exam. Now, one of the things to keep in mind with that is for us, as well as any other state, when you recruit people, you are recruiting the best and the brightest of the people that are in that field. And it can be both practitioners at the classroom level, K-12, as well as people from preparation programs, the higher ed level, whatever the case may be. And so they go into this with high expectations themselves, and when they set this score, they then give us the recommendations with standard errors of measurement 1, 2, and 3 levels above, 1, 2, and 3 levels below what that recommendation is. Well, if you go one standard error of measurement above or below, you're within the range of what that recommendation might be when you take into consideration the fact that there could be a little wiggle room one way or the other when all this is figured out statistically.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I guess you know, certainly agree with the things that we're doing, the direction we're headed in, that Sarah talked about, and so forth, the needs that are there. I guess I, you know, have a hard time believing that Tennessee is going to get to where we need to be if we're talking about, you know, pass rates here for teachers that are always standard deviation below the recommendation of the multi-state task force. You know, it just seems inconceivable to me that we can long-term get to where we need to be
Right.
with that, and it
As an
certainly doesn't
example-
help our reputation either when we're setting those pass scores there.
Exactly.
Now I recognize that we've got to look at you know, some of the impact that making changes there would have, but I would suggest that it would clearly identify some schools that either need to improve or quit preparing teachers, one or the other.
Absolutely.
And-
Absolutely. I recall Dick Ray raising these same concerns, I think 2 years ago when we first came with a recommendation like this. And we just now have feedback on those recommendations that were adopted effective September of 2010. And there were 7 different scores that were set somewhat lower than what the panel had recommended. 2 of those, both in special ed, have a pretty high pass rate. But 2 of them in the area of the world language exams, even with that much lower, the pass rates are pretty low. One that stands out in particular is the Spanish world language exam. During that first year of its implementation, the overall group pass rate was 55%, which might indicate that those people, you know, the programs weren't adapted to the changes that were implemented with the test.
Jim?
Yes, as I recall, for a college or a university to be allowed, licensed or approved to train teachers, they're required to have a certain pass rate. Is that correct?
That is in Tennessee Code annotated.
Okay.
They don't call it, in Title II it's called low performing or at risk of low performing based on the pass rate. In TCA they call it probationary status, and that goes back way before Title II, that you'd get be designated as on a probationary status if your pass rate fell below 70%.
And if
now that's overall, that wouldn't be on any one test.
And if you're on probationary status, do you have to bring that up?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So
now this falls within Martin Nash's area of program approval.
So here we are. We've got the cut scores set very low. We have most of our colleges and universities are showing the numbers, as I recall, close to 100% pass rate for the
program completers
you mentioned earlier. So, are we beginning to form an opinion that it's either then obviously the institutions appear to be unable to produce a student that will produce a higher test score. So what are we hearing? Are we hearing from the conversations with the universities that the students are coming to the university unprepared and they can't get them there in 4 years? Or are we having these conversations? And I guess my issue would be, how do we get ourselves to the point that we can raise the cut score and identify it when you give us this sheet on the percentage of pass rates?
Yes.
I'm going to take that one if it's okay. I failed to mention this before, but one thing that we have done just to that point is to reconstitute, help me, David, the Teacher Advisory Council on Teacher Education and Certification. Too many acronyms in education. But that group specifically is a K-20 group that will be meeting in conjunction with your meetings to talk about some of these issues related to licensure and program approval, because we do recognize that there is a much larger problem that we need to work to solve, and that's going to take working closely with our institutions that are preparing teachers as well as those in the K-12 arena and what they're doing to prepare students to advance to higher ed. So one of the things that we've looked at specifically is recruitment into teacher prep institutions, and looking at that too is something that probably needs to be addressed as well to help these pass rates, to help the larger issue around quality teachers in our classroom.
Well, then, are we coming down to the obvious solution that we just need to sit down with these institutions that desire to train teachers and say, look, your curriculum's going to have to become more rigorous, and we're going to find a way to test that gives us the results of all of your students that you have senior status or wherever. In other words, not let you cherry pick the scores that we look at. Is that the logical solution here? This is embarrassing.
Yeah, no, that is certainly part of this conversation, is working very closely, both using the report card data that's coming out and continuing to evolve through the THEC report card on teacher prep, the LEADER study that will also be reporting similar data on leadership preparation programs, and using program approval to make sure that we are helping to develop those programs that are really struggling and to take action where needed, where they're not meeting the grade. Yes, we take this very seriously as well. And I would also like to extend the invitation to the board members as well. I know Mike mentioned this yesterday, but if it's something that really is an issue that you'd like to get more involved with, as we're working with the advisory council, as we're doing working committees through the department to prepare for the next meetings that you all will have in July and October, we'd love to have you as part of those conversations.
Commissioner?
I could go on and on this particular issue, and I'll try to limit myself. But a couple thoughts. One of the biggest things that I hear from superintendents is their displeasure with their applicant pool for teaching positions. And their displeasure comes along two lines. One is just the incredible disproportionate preparation paths relative to the opening. So the fact that they get 50 applicants for an elementary opening and then can't find a biology teacher, and the schools of education continue to crank out elementary applicants without going and recruiting people to teach biology. So that's one path. And then the other is just teacher quality, and the fact that particularly smaller rural districts are displeased often with the caliber of people that come out of institutions. So there is a displeasure that's out in the marketplace right now with the caliber of applicants. And then the second thing I would say is that while I agree that we should continue to look at what's happening inside institutions, and that the curriculum and so on needs to continue to be reviewed, ultimately I think schools of education tend to put too much emphasis on the curriculum and too little emphasis on who they're bringing in and who they're recruiting to become a teacher in the first place. Most don't recruit at all. Most literally just hang out a shingle, and whoever shows up, shows up. And the absolute lack of recruitment effort that happens from colleges of education plays out in both not recruiting some of the great people who we could be recruiting to become teachers, but it also plays out in not getting people who are math and science majors, which we desperately need. And I think this problem gets worse as we switch into Common Core, because as we switch into Common Core, a 136 or whatever it was in math isn't going to get the job done.
All right. Okay, thank you, Commissioner. I guess it's obvious that there's a good bit of concern about where we are on the part of this board. I guess my recommendation would be that we go ahead and prove this on first reading, but then make sure that we do a lot of work between now and the next meeting, or before the second reading, to talk about where we are and where we need to be. Mm-hmm. And I guess it's my feeling that we place too much emphasis on where these cut scores need to be coming from, what the current test takers are, the results, and not on where the teacher needs to be. we need to decide, and I think, that's more like the multi-state thing here, is that's what we need teachers to be able to do, what we need them to know, and we've got to forget about where the current scores are and look at where we need that product to be.
Mr. Chairman.
Mike?
I apologize in advance, but I am going to go on and on, Mr. Commissioner. So get ready for it. Out of curiosity, is there a cut score for med school?
I feel sure that there is, though. I would hesitate to tell you what it is.
Is there a cut score for the national boards?
Absolutely, yes.
So people who are graduating from optometry school, there is if it's a normed or something, and you're going to get a percentage of people in medicine. Does Tennessee take doctors who score lower on their boards than than say another state would?
They have to pass the boards, I know, and again, where that cut score is, there's no wiggle room for passing or not passing.
Right, but would Virginia have a higher, same doctor is going to practice, where would they have a higher score, a higher cut score?
I'm really not sure if they set those by state for medical
different
profession or not. I think that there's a national standard, to your point.
Really, it is a point. What I'm trying to, I don't understand the cut score. And I do understand, I think, a good part of why it's easier to come up with maybe elementary teachers, though their retention may be something that we need to look at. But if you look at the number of ACT, those benchmark scores of high school graduates who are ready to master college math and science, they're way low. And if you look on the UT's website, students who graduate with a major in math, and this was before the recession, so coming out of it, they're going to be even more in demand, can entry level at 50,000, chemistry 60,000, physics is above 70,000. So if you expect these kids to score coming out ready to teach beyond memorization, and I don't mean to be acting like I'm an educator, I'm not, but if we're going to recruit kids, we're going to have to figure out how to pay teachers something that's going to make them to want to go into that profession as much as other professions. And to pretend that is, we're going to have to work around that is just, we're smoking dope. The other problem, though, is this, that continuing to accept the situation and to agree to a lower cut score because that's just kind of where we are is a real good way to reinforce to the providers that, yeah, there are people who are not happy with what they're doing, but from a marketplace, as long as they've got people taking their courses, and they're going to continue to do what they're doing, and they're likely. And actually, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking of two colleges in particular that are for profit, or they may be not for profit, private. That so I'm not really trying to throw a grenade in any particular way direction. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, you talk to the colleges, and they say, well, there's academic freedom and all this stuff. Dang, we're got to get folks ready to go. So I will tend, I think, to I'll probably pass on this vote, but I don't want to vote for a cut score lower than what it should be. And I think I would rather recruit from another state than to just say, well, this is the best we're going to be able to do.
No, I appreciate your comments, and I think the only thing I would say is we are very aware of that issue and want to make those changes across the board. And our only thought in this item was that to keep with consistent practice for these items that were up just because the test had been revised seemed to make sense. Since we are preparing to make changes across the board, we'd like to do it all at once in terms of raising the standard across these different certification tests, and that'll be part of the work that we'll be engaging in over the course of this next year. But duly noted.
Let me say one other thing. Well, because you never know. You know, I mentioned math, science, the higher level, the harder courses. If you look at the skill level on what any teacher, baseline skill and the level of communication skills, the level of critical thinking, the level of ability to problem solve, all those basic skill levels, and at the levels that they require to be great teachers, and you correlate it over to all the other professions and pursuits that people with those skill levels can do in life, they all pay a whole lot more than what we're paying teachers, whether it's a chemistry teacher or a third grade teacher. So really, rather than, you know, I mean, I'll say things that everybody else will smack their head, but really a lot of times College of Eds can be a default college, that they found themselves aspiring to be an engineer, found out they really didn't get prepared in high school, or for whatever reason can't do the math, and they've drifted. Well, I started out in pre-med, and Dr. Melvin walked me over to the history department in the first quarter. So, I mean, you know, it does happen. We're going to have to figure out how to make the profession something that people that we're wanting in that to get there. It's no longer the second income option.
I think that we've got one of two options here. We could pass this on first reading with the understanding we're going to come back and have more extensive discussion on second reading at probably our next meeting. But the important thing, or the other thing, is to not do it, but come back to that meeting, their next meeting, and have it on final reading, but not have another first reading. I think we could do that. I think the important thing is that we get these cut scores in place prior to the next year, so that by September we've got cut scores that we're working with.
Well, let me ask
Gary,
a question in regard.
Wait a minute. Okay.
What would be the consequences if we made a substitute motion to not accept the proposed cut scores, but the national cut scores? What would be the consequences in function? What would you all have to go back and live with?
We would just have fewer candidates that would pass. You know, the pass rates would take a hit. Mm-hmm.
I guess, Mike, I think that I'd like to understand a little bit more of the consequences before we go quite that far. But that, I think, is the question for the next meeting, is to really look at the consequences of that. And at that time, at that time, set cut scores that can be used for the next academic year. Gary, you were...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the advisory council will be meeting in June this summer, and I would like to suggest that we have this issue presented to the advisory council and get their input, and that perhaps that could be part of the study and getting the data and all that together, work through them, get their recommendation.
Okay, what's the pleasure of the board? You want to pass this on first reading, or not take action on it and take action at our next meeting on final reading? Carolyn?
I'm not ready to go to that yet, but I just wanted for us not to lose sight of what happens to the people who enroll in these teacher preparation programs who are unable to pass the praxis after they've spent untold number of hours working in courses and paying tuition, and are not ever able to pass the praxis and get their license. It's a very pervasive problem. You're talking back about no recruitment and just accepting people who want to be in education who may not have the background necessary to complete the programs even now. Mm-hmm. So it's there are some institutions who are taking advantage of students who they accept who are unprepared to take the courses, and it's a travesty.
Right. Gary?
I know in the advisory council, there's been some discussion about raising the admission requirements for teacher preparation, and I think that's a viable option. I believe that if you raise the requirements, you will attract more top quality folks.
Again, my recommendation would be that we pass on first reading, but then come back with a lot of data, including data from the advisory council on teacher education at our next meeting, and decide what these cut scores need to be. But we got a motion. Is there a second? Further discussion? Okay, all in favor of the motion say aye. Any opposed? No. One no. Okay, motion is passed. Thank you. Good discussion, and we'll look forward to
yes, we look forward to more discussion as well. Thank you for your
more
comments.
discussion in the next meeting. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Vance. Okay, we'll now move to our action items on final reading. And the first up is the school bus specifications. And let me say that we are absolutely delighted that Scott, and I think most of you know Scott, has decided to join the state board staff. Scott, we've certainly been acquainted with your work over the years, and we were impressed with that, and we're glad that you're part of the team. We also recognize that you have inherited from Art bus duty here. So,
yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My father was a bus driver for many years, so I look forward to carrying the banner on this cause. So thank you for the pleasure of being able to address you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Nixon, Commissioner Huffman, Dr. Roeder, esteemed members of the board. There have been no changes since first reading on this item, and if you want to review, behind the background is the 2-page executive summary of the changes regarding the seat covers and the fire retardant systems and the document holders and the window-free area.
okay. Questions for Scott, or is there a motion to approve? Motion to approve. Second? Got a second? Any discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Gary, move on when ready.
Last year, the General Assembly passed the Move On When Ready Act, which lets students who meet certain qualifications graduate early, perhaps at the end of the junior year, with a reduced number of credits. The act also called for the state board to determine two things. One, on the TCAP high school end-of-course test, to determine the performance level that these students would need to reach in order to qualify. So we have a recommendation that that performance level be at the advanced level. And the second was to determine a world language exam and set the expectation there. And we've recommended to you that it be the AP, one of the AP series world language exams, and to be eligible to move on when ready, they would need to make a 3 or better on that exam.
Okay, questions for Gary? Any questions? Okay, is there a motion that we approve? So moved. Got a motion, second? Got a second? Any questions, discussion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Next item, annual measurable objectives. Aaron?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Erin O'Hara, Assistant Commissioner for Data and Communications. And what we have here is an item to approve the state annual measurable objectives as they relate to the waiver that we recently received under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. The annual measurable objectives are set at the state level. We then have been working with districts to set district level targets, AMOs, for each district. The districts then have worked with schools to set targets for those schools. But the state level targets really set the goal and for the state as a whole, and the district targets will aggregate to the state targets. School targets will aggregate to district targets. So the AMOs that we are recommending here and the annual percent changed were designed under the waiver to be around 3 to 5 percentage points growth a year in the achievement annual measurable objectives. In the gap closure annual measurable objectives, we're talking about a design that was to cut in half over the course of 8 years the gap between the two comparison groups that you see listed, which amounts to roughly a 6.25 annual gap reduction as a percentage of the overall gap size per year. So that is the gist of the recommendation. I'd be happy to take any questions, specific questions.
Okay, questions for Aaron, Mike?
The whole issue of end-of-course exams on gaps, we're going to be able to solve that if somebody's taking an AP class as opposed to
Right. So we don't have any in the current system, as you're looking at it now, that relate to AP. So when we move into when we look at adding English 3 to this, then we would be in a situation where we have to examine the issue of AP as it relates to English 3. The issue with the goals that we're currently looking at is the relationship between students who are taking Algebra 1 or similar type courses, high school courses in the middle school, and what we've done there is to take in the 3-8 math category, to take those students who have taken both Algebra 1 and the achievement math test and take the Algebra 1 score and replace that 3-8 math score with that in order to try and achieve a baseline is the same. So we've done that work. Districts have set goals. We held the goals related to 3-8 math under review so that we could take a look at and make sure we had the right data, baseline data for them. We'll go back to them with those goals and have them approve them.
Where are we currently with the negotiations with the locals? Are they all concluded at this point? And
by and large, those on the district level are. There are a couple of situations where we have a couple of things just sort of lagging that we're still working through with districts, very isolated. It's only 1 or 2 districts. And then again, the 3-8 math goal, the 7th grade math goal, and the associated 3-8 math gap closure, again, we're going to go back with baselines. We've now also gotten in from districts their recommendations on school level targets, and what we're essentially looking at there is just to make sure that the school level targets aggregate to the district level target. We don't have a particular opinion on what exactly a school level target looks like. That is, again, up to the district to decide, but we want to make sure that the school level targets aggregate to the district level targets, which then aggregate to the state level targets.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I would say that the process this year, the challenge has been that we're doing it on such a short timeline. You know, the waiver was approved in February, and then we had negotiations with USAID on certain matters after that, and then we had to kick off this process. And so we'll be doing this again then this summer for the following school year. And one of the things, just to put it out there, that we've been grappling with, in the ideal world, we would like districts to have some level of flexibility to set targets that are not exactly equal to the state level target. But for that to work, we have to have an equal number of districts proposing targets that are above the state average and below the state average. We weren't able to get there this round, and so we're going to figure out a process for the summer in terms of proposing targets that will provide a little more flexibility. In particular, we're thinking about the question of whether districts that are currently performing significantly below the state average should need to make gains that are above the state average, which would provide then greater flexibility for other districts. But in an ideal world, we want the districts to own their goals and then to manage the schools to own their goals. But it only works if it all aggregates up. If all the people proposing goals propose lower goals, it doesn't work.
And so there were a couple of areas that we looked at for this round of goal setting where there were not enough districts that proposed higher goals to allow us to take those districts that had asked for something flexible underneath that to make some changes. But what we were able to do is to work with some of those districts that have the highest levels of achievement, so basically above 65% of students that are proficient and advanced, and allow them to lower their goals in a couple of places if they ask for that kind of flexibility.
Okay, Gary?
It's my understanding that we've anchored these measures against the college career ready interim targets.
Correct.
So that when we get to that point, we would be at that level. I think that's great, and I commend you for that.
There are a couple of places that we'll need to go back and just make sure, again, with some of the changes that we've had on because of the policy change related to algebra in particular, where the numbers that are set there as baselines and the numbers that are here as baselines will differ because we've changed the way we're separating that data out.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, is there a motion to approve on final reading? Got a motion? Second? Got a second? Any further discussion, questions? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate it. Okay, we next move to the International Baccalaureate Program. David?
Thank you, Chair and members. So this is final reading of the course list of approved International Baccalaureate programs. It doesn't add any courses, as you know. It really is just gets the list of courses that are already approved and already being taught in Tennessee Public Schools in line with sort of our official list of that. So I'll happily answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for David? Is there a motion to approve? Got a motion? Second? Got a second? Any further discussion or questions? All in favor say aye. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you, David. Okay, we'll move now to the charter school appeal items. Gary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On November 17th, the Jackson-Madison County Board of Education unanimously denied the Connections Preparatory Academy's initial application. The Connections Preparatory Academy amended the application, resubmitted it on December 13. The board again denied the application because part of the denial was based on significant physical impact. It was appealed to Treasurer David Lillard. On December 14th, Treasurer Lillard ruled on March 16th that approval of the charter would not have a substantive negative physical impact. The appeal then was sent to the state board. We held a hearing on April the 3rd in Jackson, Tennessee. We found that the scoring criteria established by the Tennessee Department of Education was used to rate the application. On initial review, for the initial application, the score, I think they received 20.6 points out of 100. On the amended application, they rated it 25.1 points out of 100. There were problems identified in each of the 4 areas with mission, education plan, governance, and business operations. Now, when a local board of education approves a charter school, it must be ready to sign that contract, that binding charter, a document. And because of the importance of this, the charter sponsor is obligated to provide enough specificity that an authorizer can measure with confidence the school's likelihood of being successful. Now, after this April 3rd hearing, I became convinced, I have no doubt, that Connections Preparatory Academy has the passion to do this, and they have the community support to do it, but there's still too many gaps in their application. It needs more work. I do not feel confident that I can look at it and tell you that it has a good chance of being successful. And because of that, I'm going to recommend to you that we uphold the Jackson-Madison County Board of Education's decision and ask the board to encourage Connections Prep Academy to continue to work on their application and to resubmit it at the appropriate time and be considered for approval.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve Gary's recommendation? Got a motion? Is there a second? Second. Got a second. Okay. Question, discussion? Any questions for Gary? Any questions? Okay. This requires a roll call vote, so Phyllis, if you call the roll, please.
Mr. Ayers. Aye. Mr. Edwards. Aye. Ms. Baird. Aye. Mr. Roberts. Aye. Dr. Rogers. Aye. Mr. Ross.
Aye.
Ms. Sloan. Aye. Dr. Wright. Aye.
Okay, the motion is approved. Thank you. Thank you, Gary. Okay, we'll now move to the teacher revocation appeal items. And I understand that Leslie Farmer is going to present that. Leslie?
Leslie Farmer for the Department of Education. Here we have an appeal of an initial order on February 24th, 2012 to suspend the teaching license of Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, he requested a hearing. It was held before the administrative, pursuant to the Administrative Procedures Act, before an administrative law judge. They found a judgment in favor for the state board, and pursuant to the the Uniform Administrative Procedures Act, the board is required to hear Mr. Clark's appeal and render a final order, or remand the matter for further proceedings. So you have basically one of three choices. You can adopt in whole or in part the initial order as the final order. You can enter a new order with findings and conclusions of law, or you can remand the matter to the administrative law judge with specific instructions on further proceedings. Any questions?
Okay, questions? I guess it's my understanding that there obviously was a problem with Mr. Clark, and that the way for him to get back in good graces, if you will, would be to submit evidence that he's had necessary treatment or done the necessary corrective things to ensure that this behavior does not happen again.
Right. Pursuant to the administrative law judge ruling, Mr. Clark's license be suspended until such time as he furnishes appropriate medical proof sufficient to establish a lack of alcohol or drug abuse.
Right. Okay. Questions for Leslie? Is there a motion? And as indicated, we've got three alternatives there, but the motion would, I think, be to uphold the administrative law judge finding.
So moved.
Got a motion? Okay. Got a second? Any further discussion or questions? Okay. All in favor say aye. No, need a roll call vote. Excuse me. Phyllis? Aye. Okay, the administrative law judge finding is upheld. Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate that. Okay, we'll now move to teacher license actions, and Danielle.
Okay, you have before you the slate of individuals proposed for licensing action. I will note, let me see, your item B is a restoration. That might be a cause for you guys to have a discussion. Otherwise, we just have our regular suspensions, revocations. But if you have any questions about item B, that's a little bit different. So.
Okay. Any questions for items A through L? Any questions on any of those recommendations? Okay, is there a motion that we approve the recommendations that come from staff on these teacher license actions? Got a motion? Second? Got a second? Okay, any questions? Any discussion? Okay, roll call vote. Phyllis?
Mr. Ayers. Aye. Mr. Edwards. Aye. Ms. Perry. Aye. Mr. Roberts. Aye. Dr. Rogers. Mr. Ross.
Aye. Okay, very good. The motion is approved. These action recommendations are approved. Okay, that concludes our agenda. I want to get folks, while you're here, we talked yesterday about the need for a June meeting, and we've checked some calendars, and it looks like the best date would be June the 22nd, and would like for you, to the extent that you can, look at your calendars and see if that is a possibility. We, attempt, and really the primary item, maybe some other items, but the primary item on that would be the teacher performance evaluation and review that the department, SCOLE, or others are making of that process, and seeing if we where we need to go in teacher evaluations.
Now, this will be a face-to-face meeting.
Yes, that's right. We believe that is such an important subject that we really ought to have a face-to-face meeting on that date, 22nd.
And are we talking morning?
My guess would be, yes, the morning of the 22nd, and 8:30, 9 o'clock, we'll get that agenda together, but I would think that we can probably conclude by noon, but I would anticipate a 3-4 hour meeting. Okay? Okay, good. We will set that up, and then we've also got a meeting scheduled for July the 22nd and October the 19th for the other meetings this year. At this point, I'm sorry, Gary.
Go ahead, the last.
Okay. Sorry to have to announce that one of our members is retiring from this board. Mr. Jim Ayers has been a member of this board for the last 8 years or so forth. Done a fantastic job, made great contributions to the work that we're trying to do. He doesn't talk quite as much as I do or Mike does, or Dick Ray did. But one thing I've noticed, when Jim talks, everybody listens, and we appreciate that. It may be good warning for Mike, you and I, that but anyway, Jim, we certainly appreciate your performance. Also want to say we appreciate all that you do for education through your foundation, the work that you've done over the years there, and just a tremendous contribution. We thank you for your service on this board.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's been a privilege to serve on the board. I want to tell you, when Governor Bredesen called me and asked me if I would be interested in serving on the board, I did it with some trepidation, I guess. I prepared to come into a board situation that I expected to be highly bureaucratic, that I expected to be highly constrained by, quite frankly, the administration as well as the legislature. I have been very much surprised. I tell people when the conversation comes up that we have an independent board. We have a board to a person that has one agenda, and that's to try to improve the quality of the education that our students and our graduates receive. And it took me about 2 meetings to figure that out. I am quite proud what the board has been able to achieve, and give credit where credit's due. Certainly Governor Bredesen, Governor Haslam at this point, and the legislature. I think this state is headed absolutely in the right direction. Now, one thing that I have been very adamant about and have been outspoken about, in order to continue, I believe with all of my heart, we have to have measuring sticks. And I'm just going by, I've been a businessman all my adult years, and I've learned the shorter leash that I keep myself and my people on, and the more accountability and the more frequent the accountability, the better results I get. And also I learned that instant gratification, being in rewards and just expression of appreciation or other tangible rewards, work. We will not, by the way, I almost spoke up a while ago, we will not get where we want to go on math teachers, science teachers, and maybe another discipline or two without financially rewarding these people. I would say, in my own way of saying, give it up. You're not going to do it any other way. You tell me that you can hire a college graduate that is accomplished in their field, that can go out and make $60,000 or $70,000 the first year, and you think you can hire them for $35,000 or $40,000. Ain't gonna work. It's not gonna happen. It's just a matter of when we and the legislature comes to accept it, and at that point is willing to expend the resources. That's when we're going to get here. There is, in my mind, there is not a chance to get there without that. It has been a great privilege to serve on this board. I am glad to see that our school systems, we're calling a little bit more to accountability, as well as our administrators and our teachers. And by the way, I'm not going to be here, but if somebody could figure out some way to objectively evaluate the performance of this board, I'd be the first one to vote on it. I don't know how. In fact, I've spent some time trying to think about how you objectively measure what we do. But we should be accountable too. And if I could have come up with a way to do it, you'd already heard me talking about it. But it's not fair that people be held accountable. Some people be held accountable, and maybe some other people not. I agree with that. We really need to work on these things. I am embarrassed sometimes when I open up the newspaper and see that we're 48th in anything. So I've enjoyed it. I'm going to keep up with what's going on in education. Occasionally, y'all may look out there and see me sitting in one of these chairs just listening. So I won't be speaking. I'll just be listening. So thank you, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman. I love everybody here.
Thank you. Nice plaque there. Put on your desk. Show that to everybody.
I'm sorry?
Got your nice plaque there.
Oh, yes.
Sit on your desk.
And it'll have an honored place in my office. And thank you again for the opportunity to serve.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Gary, you.
I just wanted to remind everyone, we will be doing our annual declarations at this spring meeting. So Phyllis left one on your station this morning. If you haven't given it back to Phyllis, please do so before you leave today. Thank you.
Okay. Does everybody have that and know what Gary's talking about? Okay. Anything else? Okay. Appreciate you being here. Good meeting. We'll look forward to seeing you in June. Thank you.